Welcome to the AirCon Vault. Here, you can find the recordings of the live streams from Airigol's audio conference. These are made free thanks to our sponsors: a sound effect, Aftertouch Audio, Boom Library, Fmod, Game Audio Learning, Game Sound Con, Kilohertz, Rev Rooms, Soundcut, Strata from Audio Kinetic, and Airigol's, the online home for audio people. We hope you enjoy the video.
My name is Sébastien Croteau. I'm by design, I've been a metal vocalist for 35 years. I've also been working in video games for 20 years now, and I specialize in creature and monster voices or vocal effect. I've been working now with all the unannounced project that I saw yesterday. Let's say I work on over 40 games, video game and movies over 20 years. I probably voice over 300 characters by now, even a little bit more if I'm adding the project under non-disclosure agreement. And I've also trained, because I'm also a vocal coach, I've trained hundreds of metal vocalists, but also more recently, the last couple of years, I've trained voice talent to actually teach them how to activate and sustain different types of vocal effect that are quite useful when we do creature voice acting. I'm also been, for some project, a casting director and voice director for games since 2008. As you can imagine, doing voice direction for creature and monster is quite different than doing voice direction for regular character. I can tell you that being able to do different types of vocal effect comes quite in handy, mostly because even if we have to explain, the context sometime or the different types of variation that we're expecting for a specific action, at some point, specifically for monster and creature, if we need to produce a lot of sound, and we usually do per hours, a lot of time voice talent are tired and lack imagination a little bit to do the proper variation. So when you can do this and you do voice direction, then you can actually communicate with them with sounds, basically. And that is something that we would never really do, right, in regular voice direction, like basically feeding the line to the actors. Like, that's a huge no-no. But in creature and monster voice acting, a lot of time we have to feed the line by doing the sound or the variation that we need the voice talent to actually do. So casting director, voice director. I also give a ton of workshop around the globe with different people about creature voice acting, also about how to, again, activate and sustain different types of vocal effect, not only creature and monster. For example, when people need to scream in video game, when they have to die by fire, when they have to choke to death, when they have to do a lot of those things, it mostly involves vocal fold distortion when we need to do that. And now it changes a little bit, but I still think that a lot of people today still think that you cannot train for vocal distortion, right? But if you look at rock and metal vocalists, they can actually do that, and it's a little different. It's singing, but in voice acting, you can actually train to make those scream a little bit more sustainable. So I give workshop, and then I'm also the founder of a company called the Monster Factory. This is basically an audio service provider, just specializing in creature and monster. So we do voice design, we do sound creation, we do casting, we do recording. We have a pool of creature voice talent around the world, and that's about it. So that's me. A couple of things that we worked on, probably more recently, we've done a lot of characters for Dead by Daylight. The last one was Leshen from The Witcher. I've personally voiced him. Or I was, like I said, the vocal bouillabaisse that the amazing sound designer and behavior actually used to create the sound of Leshen. But we've done a lot of things, for example, Realms of Ruin, Star Wars Outlaws, Baldur's Gate 3, Outlast, Gotham Knights, Guardian of the Galaxy. So that's basically where I'm coming from. That's my old world, and that's all I do, and I love it. I mean, being a monster is amazing, but it's a lot of job. So creature voice acting. So what is creature voice acting? It's basically the art of bringing believable vocal life to monster and creature by producing natural and organic, either vocal effect, rough vocal effect, or extreme vocal effect. Now, I have a way to classify them, and it's basically based on the actual scientific studies that were done on mostly rock and metal singers. And I'll talk about that in a couple of minutes, some of the science behind rough vocal effect and extreme voices. So for me, there are 3 different types of vocal effect that people can actually use in creature voice acting. Some of them are easy to activate and more sustainable, usually the simple one. And then for rough vocal effect and extreme vocal effect, as you can imagine, it takes a bit of training in order to be able to do that. So creature voice acting, it's not just about the sound effect and more than mimicry of sound, but it does start with mimicry. If you know a bit about D. Bradley Baker, for me, the godfather of creature and monster in voice acting, and other amazing voice talent, they always share kind of a similar story where they listen to the sound of an animal, an insect, and they try to actually replicate it. And if I look at my own career, when I started to listen to death metal music and wanted to try and imitate the singer, because we have to go back to 1990, was there was no YouTube tutorial, there was no book about it, there was no science. Basically, what you were doing is just listening to, for example, Suffocation, Napalm Death bands I was listening to, and then trying to mimic the sound. So through trials and error, at some point I was able to do a voice, and then I was actually training for that for quite a bit to make it sustainable. So a lot of time we will listen to a sound, we will listen to something, and we'll just try to replicate that sound. And for a lot of people who actually started that at a younger age, it's voice effects that are fairly sustainable now because they've been doing it over again. So basically my career is based on a bunch of annoying sound that I was doing that people around me found really annoying. And at some point, well, I made a career out of it. It only took 30-something years, right? So mimicry of sound is something that I still do, and a lot of people still do when they listen to something and they want to be able to replicate it. The voice, the human voice, can actually do a lot of amazing things. Not everything, but we're pretty good at mimicking stuff. Vocal technique and ability to sustain sound comes before acting. Now, when I'm in a crowd with voice actor, usually this one, people say, no, it's only acting, right? It's not about voice, it's about acting. I do agree with that. But let's say, for example, that you need to voice an orc or an Uruk-hai in Lord of the Ring, and the vocal technique is, meet us back on the menu, boy. I do hope that the sound is carrying through the computer. So this is what we call ventricular fold distortion, grunting. Now, after doing that for a while, this voice technique can become not really comfortable if you're not used to do that specifically. So because the voice and the voice effect is directly tied to the identity of the character, sustaining the vocal effect is also sustaining the character, right? And the thing is, no amount of acting skill will save you if you can no longer perform a specific vocal effect. So if you record for an orc and you have to talk like this, at some point, if it's no longer comfortable, well, if you say, well, I'm an actor, I'm going to find something, and you try and do this instead, that's good for another character, maybe not for an Uruk-hai. So this is why vocal effect and the identity of the character are linked together. So this is why the sustainability is pretty much ending, because most of the recording session we do, it's 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours. Sometimes it's 1 hour, but it's rare. Like the Usually the minimum amount of time is 2 hours. And you've all heard about the horrific stories of people losing their voice after screaming or doing zombie sound or doing like other things like that. It's better now. I think people are much more aware of vocal health. A voice actor are actually more open on communicating with the voice director if they no longer feel comfortable to do something. So it's a good thing. And if you record from home, like many voice actor and voice actresses are actually doing, then you can pace yourself. But when you're in the context of a recording session, a lot of time you need to go in the studio and sustain the specific vocal effect for a good amount of time. It's a world where raw emotion are actually expressed through sound instead of word. 95% of my job consists of basically doing what people in UK call emotes. Here in Canada, sometimes we call them onos or grunts. There's different words for that. It's rare that we have a script to work with. It happens. Sometimes monster and creature do talk. So then we can do the script line. But a lot of time what we are required to do are, breathing, running, attack, death, pain, all those sound, all the action that we need to voice. So, and most of the time we don't have any script, so we need to come up with all the variation ourselves. And it can be quite tricky, as you can imagine, if we need some time to do 10 to 20 variation for each action. Per hours, it's around 200 sound. For a 3-hour recording session, it's 600 sound. So you have to be quite good at providing all the variation as a creature voice actor. As in human sound, and the funny thing is, we use a lot of the human inflection in our voice when it's time to do specific action. For example, let's say that I'm a human and I'm surprised, like that. I do a little, in a human voice. If I were to voice a creature, whatever the voice technique, the little sound signature would be exactly the same. So even if we do creature and monster, there's a lot of humanity in them, basically because a lot of the inflection that we have in the language, we use them to communicate the information, because even if it's a vocal effect, people will listen to it as, oh, okay, that is detection. Okay, that is a question. Okay, that is surprise. So yeah, monster are a lot more human than we think. And a lot of time we just rely basically on vowel and consonances, right, for what we are doing. So it's the art of what I call vowel placement or display vowel movement. And for each action, because I've heard some of my colleagues say this, like for a lot of emotes, you just need to go through the alphabet in order to do variation. The thing is, a lot of time, there are very specific vowel for a specific action. For example, I'm French. This is why sometimes I mispronounce stuff and I stumble upon words when I talk English. Let's say that I were to bump my small toe on a table, right? The letter, apart from swearing, of course, but the vowel that will go out would probably be an A, so it's an A in English, but I in French. And this is the natural sound of me producing a pain sound, right? So a lot of time, that vowel, especially when it concerns pain, has to be in there somewhere. Not all the time, but most of the time. Same thing for different efforts, same thing for different things. For example, attack dynamics. If you were to go through the alphabet and you try an attack with a B, ba, with a C, ka, with a D, da, with a F, fa. It doesn't sound like an attack, right? You have to mostly use a consonant like R, K, T, S, J, R to give it an attack dynamic. So we have to be really, really, really specific on what we will use in terms of vowel and consonances when we need to do all the variation for a specific action. Timing, in creature voice acting, timing, context, intent, tone, subtext are key elements, but sometimes they have less impact on the character. For example, let's say that I'm a human character in a zombie apocalypse game. Probably, maybe I've seen my parent die, or I had to kill them because they turn into zombies. I probably had to kill a few people to survive, right? So everything that happened will actually shape the character and shape the way that, for example, a voice actor, we actually decide to portray a specific kind of character. But let's say that this human character is bitten by a zombie. Do you think it's going to be the melancholic orphan zombie looking for its parent? Probably no. You just want to eat your face, right? And that is true for a lot of different types of creature. And it's funny because a lot of time I receive like background information and brief on specific creature, and I'm like, good job, narrative team. Like, that is really interesting, but a lot of time this will not impact, especially specifically when there's no word, this will not impact the way that I will do a specific sound. For example, a spider, that would be clicking, high-pitched clicking sound. Even if you provide me with 4-page of background information about this wonderful Spider King, for example, it's not going to influence a lot the sound that I'll be producing for this specific character. But sometimes it does, mostly for a humanoid character, when it's an alien, when it's an orc, goblin, other things like that, when it's more humanoid, now this can have an impact. But if I need to voice a beast, a rhinoceros, where I did recently for a short movie in France, like the background information will not necessarily help me to create a more convincing rhinoceros, right? As I was talking about how we need to improvise stuff, so being able to improvise and being inventive is highly necessary. Like I said, if you need to come up with 200 sound per hour, at some point you're lost in a sea of vowel and consonant. So you have to be quick on your feet to actually be able to do the variation rapidly, and mostly also to save your voice. Because if you take too much time and you're going around and it's not quite that, and especially when it's projected voices, that can be pretty hard. So we want to make sure that we are quite efficient when doing those. And this is why after 15 years of doing that, I come up with what I call a phonetic script. A phonetic script is basically, like a regular script, but only phonetic for all the types of different action. And I've been using that for quite a bit now, because instead of the voice talent focusing on the mental gymnastic of trying to come up with variation, it takes sometimes a little bit away from the performance. So I give them a script and then they can focus on the performance. So I've used that now quite a bit, especially recently for a sound library that we recorded, because we wanted all the voices to be layered together. So we needed something very clean cut and making sure that everything was exactly the same for all the voice technique to be able to blend. And also that can actually save us time and save the voice of someone, because the more variation you're doing, especially when it's projected voices, the more it can be problematic and the more you can be at risk of injury. So creature and monster voiced by human beings is a relatively new field in voice acting. And when I say relatively new, people like Dee Bradley Baker, Fred Tatasciore, amazing voice talent, have been doing that for a very long time. And myself, I've been doing it for 20 years. But most people, when they hear about it, they're like, what? Human can actually do creature and monster sound? So this is not something that is well spread in the industry. Maybe now it starts to be a little bit different, but this is for a lot of people quite new when I talk to them about that specifically, because as you know, the go-to sound or the go-to things for creature voices are actually animal sound libraries or software plugin to modify the voice of the actor, the actress, namely Dehumanizer and other things like that. So usually that's the go-to for most people. And I've been the go-to for, like, I was listening to King Kong 1933. The funny thing is they used Tiger Sound. Probably they didn't have a Gorilla Sound library, or maybe if they had, maybe the Gorilla Sound library wasn't too convincing for them to use it. So they used Tiger Sound in that, but people have been using that for decades. And that's a go-to. That's usually the cheapest option, and I'll talk about that in a few seconds. But there are a few advantages and disadvantages of using that, and now that there's other option to consider for this specific type of sound. So, of course, if we talk about sound library, some of the most amazing sound library, and there are loads of them for me, because I work with them through sound effect or boom library. So if you talk about aquatic creatures, so sea lions, seals, walruses, dolphin, different animals, like even koala, sometimes they can do, because they have a second pair of vocal folds in the nose. Yeah, this is something that I've learned recently. So I would love to have a second pair of vocal folds in the nose in order to produce more sound. So a lot of people rely on that. There's also, if you go in boom, monster and beast, creature, humanoid. And again, on the sound effect, if you go there, there's quite a bunch, different types of prices. So depending on your budget, that can actually be an interesting option. And they're usually well recorded, high quality, most of them from what I've seen. So this is the main option. If I were to divide the market of creature voice or creature sound in video game, probably the sound library would be something like 75, 80%. The rest would be, but there's, it's more humanoid character. The rest will be Dehumanizer. And it's probably less than 1%, and even probably less than that, of actual creature voice actor or voice actresses doing creature sound for the game. So again, like I was saying, it's not that common. Maybe one day it's going to be more common, but for now, that's the option. So the thing is, with Animal Sound Library, the main advantages, or of course, it's cost effective. Like depending on the budget that you have when you work in video game, it's going to provide you with a few $100 with usually 5, 6, 7,000 sound. So you can use them and drag and drop them, play with them a little bit. But that's about it. Like it's really cost effective. Usually it's high quality as well, and it's somewhat user friendly most of the time. The few disadvantages that I see is usually a lot of the action are generic. Now you will find, walking, breathing, attack, pain, death, sometimes death by fire, choking, and a few others. So all around a dozen different types of action. If the game that you work on have more specific action, now then you will need to work on the sound and making sure it match the video animation, because sometimes creature and monster have more complex attack than just like a rah, like that. So you need to work on the sound to make sure it match everything that you see on the screen. And also because it's, the main thing in the market, like people are used to hearing all of those sound, right? Some monster and creature sound are more important than others sometimes. But for example, if you play an hack and slash game and you need to rampage your way through hundreds, if not thousands of monster, a lot of time people don't focus too much on the sound of the creature, because this is something they do repeatedly, like rah, 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 rah. So the sound has to be good, don't get me wrong, but sometimes people focus a little less on that than when there's a few monsters in the game, and then they appear, their appearances are a little rarer than the other ones, so people tend to listen to that a little bit more. So the two key challenges that I see using Animal Sound Library is what I call clarity of intent. And this is not me criticizing sound designer. I work with a lot of them and I respect what they're doing. They're doing an amazing job. But at some point, sometime, you need a human performance in order to make it a little bit more believable. Because when you are a sound designer and you take a tiger sound, a koala sound, a seal sound, and you put them together, you never know the context in which those sounds were recorded. And the thing is, context matter. because you might be playing with a sound of a bear just trying to attract a mate, or you might be playing with the sound of a koala was saying, don't come here, you know, it's my territory. Territory. I actually said that in British, right? Sometimes it happens. And when you put those sounds together, like from the sound designer perspective, you're listening to it and you're like, okay, that's fear. All right, that's anger. But the thing is, it's only a perception, right? It is your perception that this is the sound that match with, and it's, you know, as valuable as anything else, but for me, it's still a perception. Being able to have someone who does the intent, would have the right intention, and then you can play around and put whatever a koala sound in it, or an evil, not an evil goat, a goat sound, or any other things like that. You can actually play with that, but at least at the core of the performance, you will have an intent, and you will have the specific emotion given by a performer. And this is something that is hard to get from animal sound when you don't know the context in which those sounds were produced, so you don't know about the intent. And perception is from outside, intent is coming always from within. So I think, like, for me, that is something. Of course, there's a few exceptions, like a lot of creature and monster are actually done with animal sound library, and they're amazing. If we just think about Chewbacca, I think it's, you know, they use 12 or 13 different kinds of animal to do his voice, and it's just amazing. But for me, those kind of example are rare. A lot of time, for me, from my personal opinion, you end up sounding a little bit the same. So, sorry, I need to hydrate sometime. All right. The other option, creature voice actor, what I call them, vocal stunt performers. And there's a reason why I call that vocal stunt performance. Basically, if you think about the stunt people in movies, they are highly skilled and trained people to do some of the most difficult physical tasks, right? So except Tom Cruise. Tom Cruise can do all of his stunts. Good for him. You can train an actor to a point to perform on screen, but sometimes for the most dangerous one, they call the stunt double, and then that person can actually do the stunt. And the thing is, we would never think about hiring someone who's not trained to do a stunt, right? We would not go take any actors who is not trained and say, hey, can you actually, you know, do a stunt in our movie? Like that's a thing like nobody would actually think about. Sorry. All right. But in voice acting, a lot of time we're asking people who are not trained specifically for this to perform this sound. So this is why when I talk about what we do, it's basically we do creature voices, of course, but for me, it comes under the term vocal stunt performers, basically vocal stunt double. So there's things that we can do because we're trained, and we can do longer, and we can sustain it longer than people who are not trained. So the few advantages, I think what we can provide is a little bit original in the sense that that's not the most common thing in creature and monster voices. It can be tailor-made for a specific project. So a lot of time we can see the creature, we can help with the voice design, like when the voice actor can actually participate to the creation of help with the creation of the voice. I think it can help, and it can be tailor-made for project. And we can also match the video animation. Now, what I was talking about when you put animal sound together, you put them together, and then you have a video animation, and you make sure it matches, right? That takes quite a bit of work, depending on how many video animation or cutscenes that you have to do with that. Having a performer, you can actually match what you see on the screen. And then the sound designer can have their fun with it. They can do whatever. But you actually, something that matches the intensity, you know, the silence, the dynamic of what's happening on the video animation or in the cutscene. And a lot of time, and when I say this, when I meet people, and I say, well, you know, it's a little bit more costly than a sound library, absolutely. But in the end, we can sometimes work faster and help the sound designer achieve what they want faster. So first, in some occasion, we can actually save time on the whole thing. And, you know, time is money. So sometimes sound designer can focus on other things that they're actually doing. And of course, the disadvantages, well, it's more costly, again, than the sound library. And if you're not trained, you can be at risk of sustaining vocal injuries. And that is something that you don't want to have, especially when, you know, you work with your vocal folds or other things in the supraglottic structure to actually create those sounds, right? A little bit about vocal archetypes. And this is something that I have a lot of conversation about with clients, because most of the time people are coming and they're asking, like, can we have something really new that has never been done before? We want something unique for our project. And I'm like, yes, but let me tell you about vocal archetypes. So basically, vocal archetype is a sound that is associated with a specific type of creature, right? If we think about, you know, the first example I was actually giving at the beginning, if we think about an orc, an urukai, down there, meat is back on the menu, boy. And of course, he usually speaks British or Cockney, but that is something else. But yeah, so that is something specific that people have been exposed to, mostly because of Lord of the Ring and all the movie. So in people's mind, that's the reference that they have when they see that character. They're expecting this type of voice. And that is actually true for a lot of different types of creature and monster. Like even today, when I'm casting for an evil witch, you know, if we go back in time, the go-to is the Wizard of Oz, when the green witch is actually burning from the water. Oh, I'm melting! That, an early Disney movie, that's the type of voice that you're kind of expecting when you see an evil witch. Of course, you can play outside the expectation zone, which can actually, you know, it can be quite surprising. But for me, people see a creature, see a monster, and there's certain type of sound that they're expecting for that creature to be believable to them. So for me, vocal archetypes, this is that the thing, audio references of people and what they're expecting. So vocal archetypes can actually evolve through time, and I'll give you a specific example in a bit. But sometimes a sound that is associated with a creature can actually change over time. Each monster and creature can have more than one, meaning that for one character, one creature, you can use different types of vocal effect to do this specific type of creature. And the thing is, in creature voice acting, every type of vocal effect that you can do actually unlock different types of character that you can actually do with them, right? So the more you can unlock vocal effect, the more character that you can actually voice. So monster and creature can have more than one vocal archetype. One specific sound can be associated with different types of monster and creature. For example, like I don't have the video, but if you listen to some of the sound from the ghouls in Fallout, where the feral ghouls, like that. That's the sound. I've played Fallout 3 tons, maybe too much, but no, there's never too much of Fallout, right? That's the sound of a ghoul. And the ghoul is a different thing than a zombie. But if you listen to zombie sound, that's also something. So a specific sound can be shared among different types of monster and creature. So to give you an example, if we talk about the evolution of zombie sound, right? That may be something that you were not expecting Saturday morning to talk about zombie, but I love zombie. I have a lot of t-shirts from zombie. One of my favorite zombie is Bob from Day of the Dead. I love Bob. I have a t-shirt of Bob. So I'm a huge fan of zombie movie, even the early one when it was associated with voodoo, right? So if we listen to George Romero, I think it's Night of the Living Dead 1962, this is, you know, one of the first movie to use the, you know, zombie modes. Like that. So that became the dominant vocal archetype during that period of time. And if you play like me Resident Evil 1 on PlayStation 1 at 3 a.m. in the morning, because I didn't want my mom to know that I was still playing the game, those sounds were quite scary, right? Those were the sounds associated with zombie back then. And then, ooh la la, 28 days later arrived, and the remake of Dawn of the Dead from Zack Snyder. Now, I know, of course, 28 days later, these are not zombies, they're infected, right? So different. But because the physical dynamic of the character changed, so now the zombie were no longer slow, they were actually running. I think they needed to change the sound to make it a little bit more menacing, and people would be a little bit more afraid of them instead of just doing when you're running. I don't think that sound would have fit running zombie, right? And because of those two movies, then something a little bit more aggressive came to be. So that was a new vocal archetype for zombie. If you, for example, play Days Gone and you listen to some of the sound that are in the org that you have to fight against, sometimes you hear what we call an aggressive sound. So a high pitch sound like that. This is, by the way, producing sound by inhaling the air instead of projecting. So now this can be used to voice different types of zombie. And of course, The Last of Us, some of the big bloater that they did, but also the infamous clicker, right? And that is one of the rare occasions where they really like took a chance, probably, and they say, hey, we need to come up with something very specific for the clickers in The Last of Us. And they did. The problem is nowadays, if you want to do that clicking sound in any other kind of zombie game, people will think about The Last of Us, right? So they were so good at coining something that now it's hard to use that sound and people not think about The Last of Us. So it's kind of a no-go for most creature voice actor when we need to voice zombie. We leave it to that. But if you know a little bit about the history of horror movies, you know that The Grudge, if you listen to the voice effect of the female doing the voice, it's actually a clicking sound, but they tweaked it a little bit in The Last of Us. So when I was talking about the fact that the vocal archetype can evolve through time, they can have some that are shared among different types of creature. This is what I mean. So today, when people are expecting a zombie sound, what I call the main vocal archetype, because there's always a main one that people are expecting, it's usually this one. So and then after the other different vocal effect that you can use for that. So because I have my presentation on the side there. So knowing vocal archetypes actually help when you work in audio, help connect the players to audio references that they already have in their mind and they're kind of expecting for a specific type of character. So knowing them can actually help you achieve that. And a lot of time provide, and this is my opinion, maybe a more realistic and credible approach. Because if you expect a sound and it's not like that, maybe you will stop being immersed, for a few seconds and say, what is that? Of course, the what is that effect, we want that when we work in audio. But sometimes you're kind of expecting something and it's not that thing. Sometimes it's good. But for me, sometimes it's like, maybe it doesn't necessarily work with what we are seeing on the screen. So this is why, for me, it's always a good thing to know the different types of vocal archetype for a creature and monster. Now, a little bit about, very rapidly, the science behind some of the vocal effect that we use to create those sounds. There's been scientific studies since 1996 about mostly the mechanical side of things. Now, and a lot of them are coming from something called the Complete Vocal Institute in Copenhagen. They probably did always 6 or 7 different types of scientific studies about that, because prior to that, there was not a lot of information about what we use in to produce those sounds. I was lucky enough to have a camera in my nose to actually be able to see for myself what I'm actually using to produce some of the vocal effect. When you love science, it's actually quite beautiful. When you don't love science, it's actually horrible. It looks like the predator had a baby with the alien, and there's mucus and saliva mix and all of this. So pretty gruesome picture, but you know, when you're interested in that kind of thing, that's can be interesting. So some of the scientific studies have been in 96, 98. One that is particularly interesting was conducted on, I think, 20 or 30 singers over the course of 14 years. So when I talk about being able to sustain the vocal effect, that's one of the major study, not with, you know, tons of people. There's always what we call statistical significance, which matters in science. But at least with that specifically, they were able to show that being able to produce those vocal effects, if done with correct technique, can actually be sustainable, right? So that was interesting to see, because the people conception about extreme vocal, you know, because that is something, if we were to do ourselves, that would be, you know, in an urgent situation or life-threatening situation, right? So people's perception about extreme vocals are different than you know, when you're a natural practitioner. Like, you're not screaming for help. You're not screaming because someone is attacking you. You're screaming because you have a character to do in a video game. So yeah, that was one of the major study. Another one that was done with metal vocalists, 74 of them, could actually show that the percentage of vocal dysphonia, that means having problem with your voice, was lower than what they actually expected. So when people talk about extreme vocal, people expect like, wow, that's the worst. But when you're an actual practitioner, it's not the same cup of tea at all when you do this. So a few things about the vocal anatomy and sound production, because of the scientific studies that we had in the past, we can actually name some of the things. And this is where it's interesting when you work on video game and you work in audio to know the specific name of the voice technique, because sometimes it's hard to communicate specifically what you want from the talent that you work with for different types of voices. And of course, the voice offers many possibilities, but there's also limitation for each of the voice technique that we're using. So it can offer possibility, but they also have limitations. So some of the things that we use in creature voice acting are called the vocal fold. A lot of vocal effects are based on the vocal fold. So there's something that we call creaking, and you probably heard that in singing when people go, yeah, 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 whoa, like that. This is called creaking. And of course, when you think about people screaming, now I know I'm not going to scream because probably the audio will be overloading. But you use kind of the same vocal technique, only with a little bit more airflow, and the vocal fold are actually vibrating faster when you are using your vocal fold to scream. So creaking, I was talking about ingressive sound. So ingressive sound, this is something that you do when you inhale, right? So you can do clicking sound. Like that. You can do high pitch. You can do neutral. And you can go low. See? Because it's early for me. I haven't warmed up prior. So the thing is, you can do quite a bit, but especially when you work with voice effects that are taking place on the vocal fold, especially aggressive, it can actually dry out your vocal fold faster. So this is why you need to stop at some point and speaking louder, regularly speaking loud for like a few seconds, just to get the saliva back on the vocal folds, because that can happen. There's something that we call polyphonic splitting. This is basically creating a whistle tone over vocal distortion. So again, I don't know if the sound will carry through, but this is something like so yeah, it's quite the vocal gymnastic, but this is whistle tone over vocal distortion. So we can use the vocal fold to produce those vocal effects. We can also use something we call ventricular fold, which is a mucous membrane higher in the vocal tract. Most people, when, you know, for example, when you do a throat clearing, like that, or when you cough, or when you vomit, that's actually part of the sound that you are actually doing. So we use ventricular fold, not quite a bit, not like death metal singers or metal singers, but we use them from time to time. With that, we can do something called grunting, which is basically using ventricular fold to create Cookie Monster. C is for cookie, that's good enough for me. Or you can use ventricular fold to do throat singing. So Tuvan throat singers, Tibetan monks, even Inuit throat singers use ventricular fold to create sound. But of course, you can augment the airflow and go from Cookie Monster, cookie, cookie, and create a little bit more orcish sound or more demonic sound with that. So we use ventricular folds for that. We can also use the uvula. So uvula, the little thing dangling in the back of the throat. If you know the story about how the Predator sound came to be, I've seen interviews with the amazing voice actor Peter Cullen. He was actually using uvula vibration. And it's a very low sound. And, you know, the way he was telling the story, people couldn't hear what he was doing. They needed to raise the volumes. Actually, oh, okay, this is what he's doing. So he was doing something like that. So this is the uvula, and it's basically just the airflow that hits the uvula, so you can make it vibrate. So this is something we use sometimes even to voice cute creature. And this is not tongue trill. We can go there. And sometimes we can even combine it with other voice effect to combine them to create something very specific. So we can use the uvula. We can use also something called aeroepiglottis fold. Aeroepiglottis fold, if you're familiar with jazz music, probably you've heard about something like anyway, so this is aeroepiglottis fold vibration. Now, people can use that and to a lower register to create voices like, hello, yeah. This is quite different from ventricular fold, because with ventricular fold, it's possible to project, but with aeroepiglottis fold, if you use a larynx in a lower position, it's going to be harder to actually do any kind of projection. And a lot of voice actors don't know that. And they use this, you know, to talk like a monster like this, and it's amazing. But as soon as they're going to do any type of projection, this is where the coughing and the throat clearing actually start, because it's almost impossible to project past to a certain point when we use that. Soft palate tissue. So this is basically tissue way back in the soft palate that you can use. A lot of time people think that I'm actually using my vocal fold to do that. This is actually tissue in the back that we use to create zombie sound. Like this. And the reason that I'm not using my vocal fold, because there's no pitch. I can put a pitch in it. And I can remove the pitch, meaning remove the vocal fold activation and still create the sound. So the sound is not happening on the vocal fold. So for a lot of those vocal effects, you know, we need to have a healthy voice. But for some, like, we're not even using vocal fold to create the sound that we are doing. So I could talk about, you know, I have a workshop about extreme voices and vocal level, about 3 hours on how to train for this specifically, but it's possible to actually train. So why is it interesting to use a science in, for example, in communicating in a casting brief or communicating instruction when you're a voice director to a voice talent? Because it's science-based and it can help with communicating. So we have a common terminology. When we know about it, we can communicate, hey, can you try like this specific vocal effect and try to go up or higher or do this and this? Again, when you're knowledgeable into the limitation of each vocal effect, it gets easier. But for me, provide, you know, a common terminology to talk about, because I've been, you know, working in the last 20 years and I had my fair share of, that kind of sound. It's hard for me to explain. I'm like, is it this, this, this? Oh, okay, it's this one. So this is ventricular folds distortion. And in a way, it's like educating people a little bit about the science behind that. And at some point when they're knowledgeable about it, it's easier for them to communicate what they're expecting of us. And of course, when we are in a recording session as a voice director, it's actually faster and easier to communicate with the voice talent when we are doing that kind of thing. Very rapidly, it is also possible to do voice layering because I'm looking at the time, and I know Lewis told me I have 80 minutes, and I still want to leave some room for some question about it. I'm glad I checked the time because, yeah, I can be chatty, as you can imagine. So voice layering is actually layering different types of voices on top of one another. And we can layer voice, or we can use different things to actually change the sound. For example, sometime when I have to do beasts or alligators and stuff like that, I use PVC tube. Specifically alligator, I have one PVC tube that I put on my nose for the soft palate movement, and I have another one that I put here to create another sound. Now, PVC are really interesting when you want to create sound, mostly because it kind of diminishes the human element in the voice. So we use that for example, for beast or for other things like that. We tend to use PVC tube to kind of remove as much as possible the human element. But the problem is, the sound that goes out, like this is what you're stuck with. So a lot of time it's okay to provide an example without, so sound designer can play with it, because once you recorded sound with the PVC, it's kind of like that's the sound, like the PVC kind of quality to it is stuck in the sound. If this is what you want, fine. But if you want to be able to play with it sometime, it happened that people are having a problem with that specifically. So voice layering, usually what we do is we use low, medium, and high frequency sound, so we can mix them together depending on the size of the creature. If it's a big creature, people expect a low sound, right? If it's a small creature, people expect a higher sound. So again, this is tie up with the vocal archetype that I was talking about. So we use those frequencies, we mix them together depending on the specific type of creature that we need to voice. We can go up, like we've done 5, even 6 layers sometime of voices for a specific kind of a creature. Layers can be linear, meaning it's going to have the same sound signature, or they can be non-linear, meaning you're going to have a main sound and then which is not following necessarily the sound signature of the previous one. So sometimes we mix that. And of course, we can use sometime water. We have a trash metal can, a wood metal can. We have wood instead of PVC, it's wood. So this is what I call voice Foley. Basically, we use different things to complement the types of sound that we're actually doing. So, and even I've seen a bunch of amazing sound designers use that. And when you know how to use them, it can give really interesting result. So, yeah, voice layering very rapidly. The pros, multiple combinations that are actually possible for mixing and sound design, can create rich and original and unique audio, organic and natural. I have said that, I'm sorry. But also the thing is, the disadvantages is the cost. It's a greater cost because, as you can imagine, and specifically when we record onos and grunts, because that's the main thing with creature and monster sound, we don't remember all the variation we did, right? So when we do the first layer, it can go quite fast. But when we do the second one, especially for the more complex action, it takes more time because we need to re-listen to what we recorded. And we need to make sure that when we record the sound, it perfectly matched the other one. So basically, when we are in a recording session, we put the Reaper session on the screen, and we look at the individual audio line that we need to do, and we just go like, there's a we start there and we end there. So this takes way more time. Like if we can record 200 sound per hour for the first layer, usually we go down to 100 sound per hour for all the following voice technique that we need to do. So of course, it's a cost more when we do that. It's not all project anyway necessitate that anyway. So a few things very rapidly, if you work in audio or if you cast sometime for Creature and Monster, when you do the casting brief, it would be interesting to know if there's any extreme sound or different specific vocal technique that would be quite actually helpful to the voice talent. Make sure that the voice talent can sustain the voice technique for the duration of the recording session. Again, I've heard too many horror stories still today. Recently, I heard that people were hired for a few hours to do orc sound, and most of them quit after an hour 30 minutes. But it's better now. People are more thinking about vocal health. They're more careful with voice talent, but it's still a good thing to make sure that the voice talent you're hiring can actually sustain those. So if the voice talent has a previous history of being able to scream, to do combat barks and all of that, that is a good indicator of, okay, that person should know what he's or she doing. So that can actually help quite a bit. And when we establish a vocal identity of the character, a lot of time we have to talk about the possible range, because it's not everyone who's knowledgeable about the range of sound that we can do with a specific vocal effect. So it's always a good thing to have a discussion prior to recording session so that the voice director or people present can actually know about the possibilities, but also the limitation. If possible, and I know that's not always the case, but if you can provide pictures to voice talent or people working on the sound, and a little bit of background information, that is always helpful. Also, if you can provide a list of action prior to the recording session, like a lot of time, I know that people think it's tied to NDA, but I don't think that attack, jump, and death is necessarily something that is giving away anything about the project. Maybe if it was Mario triple jump or Link attack, like maybe this is a little bit too much. But a lot of time it will greatly help the voice talent to prepare for the recording session and knowing ahead of time what he or she will do there. So when it's possible, please share the list of action with them. That's it. If I'm going to go in the chat, so I'm just going to go do this, open up the question thing. Oh, yeah, I've already seen the question thing. Sorry. So, all right. If it's all right with you, I'll jump to some of the questions that are in the chat. I apologize. My screen wasn't big enough for me to see the chat while this was happening. And now I can see like there's quite a bunch. So I'll start with the first one. What is your opinion on software similar to Krotos Dehumanizer, or do you prefer to process manually? A question by Fish Oseen. I'm sorry if I mispronounced that. So I think for me, one of the main thing is that when using Dehumanizer, at least, because I'm always trying to favor humans, but I love sound designer work on sound libraries, don't get me wrong. There's a human present in the mix, and you use a software and a plugin. So for me, I'm always glad in the sense that there's a human working, and it's a good thing. The thing is, it's quite clearly identifiable for a lot of things. Like if you listen to most Hollywood blockbuster villains, it's always kind of the same vocal effect. So it's interesting, but at some point, it's kind of being used and used and used a bit. The thing is, people sometimes can achieve that a little bit more naturally, and it's possible to do some of this, but most of it, no, of course, the plugin. And as a voice actor, that's something else too, is when you record, you can hear the result in your headphones. And that is interesting because you can actually learn how to play with it. So there's a little bit of a learning curve when you record with Dehumanizer, because I'm like, okay, this is when I do this, this is what happened. When I do a higher pitch, this is what happened. When I do a lower pitch, this is what happened. And you can actually play with that. I did that very recently with the people of Krotos when I was giving a workshop at Home UK in London. They actually came so the actor could actually play with the sound. So I think it's you know, again, depending on your budget, depending on what you need to do, it's a good option, depending, again, on what you are looking for. So, yeah, but most of the time I tend to try and do stuff as natural and organic as possible. And then, of course, if you want to put the Dehumanizer in it, you know, be my guest. But I'd rather have that natural and organic sound before putting any or too much plugins in the mix, because sometimes you lose, you know, like we say in French, je ne sais quoi. Are there any measure like Wouter-Meyer? I'm sorry again if I mispronounce your name. I apologize. I'm going to put the spotlight. Here you go. Oh, did I? No, stop spotlight. What is your, okay, yeah, sorry, thank you. Are there any measure and tips to avoid damaging your vocal folds permanently, as it is easy to abuse when just experimenting? Yes, vocal health is quite complex. Like, I could give another 3-hour workshop on just that specifically. Now, vocal health is not only about the vocal folds, right? It's about hydrate well, sleep well, your life habit, you not smoking, you're not taking a lot of alcohol. Like, it's the same thing with general health, right? If we take care of ourselves, it's a good first step. But the thing is, specifically for what we need to do, you know, and when we have to do combat barks and the screaming, a lot of people rely on what we call semi-occluded vocal tract exercises. Basically, those are humming, lip trill, straw phonation, so blowing bubble in water with a straw. That works for regular voices, right? So depending on what you do, that can be interesting. But specifically for, you know, everything related to the screaming, to projected voices, more specifically to vocal effect, like this is something that you have to train for. If you just warm up and cool down, you know, in your life, and you never work on the actual thing, you're going to be amazing at warm up and cool down, but it is not working to acquire skill, right? If you want to be a good singer, you need to sing. If you want to be a good Olympic skater, you need to skate, right? Just warm up and cool down. So for voices, like there's a lot of people who have that approach. And for me, it's not enough, because you need to have the main thing in the middle to train for that specifically. And training can take several years. As you can imagine, it takes several years to train a stunt person, a stunt double in movies. It's actually kind of the same thing for vocal stunt double. Like, we need to train intensively in being able to sustain those sounds. And it's not by avoiding them that we can actually become good at them. Like, a lot of people will say, like, if you have to scream, like, don't do it a lot, or reduce the volume in order to still give the appearance of realism. But I think this, when you don't have time to train, I can perfectly understand that, you know, you can do only a few things, and that's all right. Voice talent need to advocate for themselves when they're not comfortable or they feel that they have enough with their voice. But yeah, again, I would love to give you more information about that, but this is a 3-hour workshop, and I think there's other talk today, so I don't want to take all that time. But reach out to me via email if you want. I'm easily, you can find me easily on LinkedIn or on social media, and I could probably send you a few things, a few websites, and a few things that if you want to look for something very specific on making sure that you want to avoid damaging the vocal folds, hit me up, and it's going to be a pleasure to actually send that to you. How would you go about? No, that is Lewis. I'm putting spotlight, and then Lower spotlight. There you go. How you go about making creature for small, cute animal rather than big, scary ones? Yeah, there's a few specific voice effect that you can use. I was giving an example earlier about uvula. We did some of the cute creature, the Saurian in Genshin Impact. Those are cute creature because usually people, it's the monster factory. It's not the cute monster. So people expect us just to do the ghouls, the zombie and everything, but we can actually do some of them. For example, that I was doing the Cuckoosaurus in Genshin Impact, and that was using aggressive sound, but not as aggressively as some of the other stuff that we can do with aggressive voice technique. Again, usually cute creatures, smaller, it's usually mid to a higher pitch. So there's a few options for that to be able to do that vocally speaking. Yeah, every voice technique that we can actually project, we can actually reduce the projection and using for something cuter. Even the epiglottis fold in a low larynx position, that's not cute, but that can be used, of course, if your cute creature, you want it to sound like a jazz singer. that can actually be one. But let's say that usually there's way more option to do the opposite of cute creature in terms of monster and creature sound, then there is option to do cute creature. It's a little bit more limited in terms of voice effect that we can actually use for that specifically. All right, could you please provide a list of the OUUs? Would love to study more. Enrico Caporale, absolutely. Reach out to me, find me on social media. But like I was saying, creaking, which happened on the vocal fold, ingressive sound, inhale, which basically when you pull the air in, polyphonic splitting, the little thing with the whistle tone and vocal distortion, grunting, using ventricular fold, that is called grunt, epiglottis fold, so that is called growling, jazz growling, uvula vibration or uvula thrill, using the uvula, that can be a thing, soft palate tissue that you can use to produce zombie sound. But yeah, if you want the specific list, I'll be more than happy to send it to you. So thank you, Enrico. When recording, are you planning that other layers, animal props might be, oh, sorry, I'm going to put the spotlight. I'm not quite used to this amazing feature. I would love to have that more in the stuff that I'm actually presenting. So when recording, are you planning that other layers, animal props might be added in later, or trying to get as close to the finished creature just using the voice? We try to get as close as possible to the thing, because most of the time we're not going to have another recording session later down the process. Like, we try to make the process efficient and short because there's money involved. So we don't want that to be too costly, because it's already more costly to hire a human than buy a sound library. So usually when we work, and this is all the work we do in pre-production, and when we establish the vocal identity of the character, we do a lot of provide a lot of audio samples. We do a lot of testing. So prototyping, audio, let's call it audio prototyping. So a lot of time when we're sent, for example, a specific creature, we will look at the creature and say, okay, so do you have any audio references? If no, do you have a description of what should be his vocal quality, right? And then after that, we can actually record, test different option, see what works, send it to the person so the person can actually listen to it and then readjust if we need. But when we go in recording, we try to do like everything in one go. And then, of course, if there's animal sound afterward, if there's sound design, a lot of the people that we work with are usually taking care of the sound design. Like, I think it happened 3 or 4 times in 20 years that we had to do the sound design. A lot of time, they just do it themselves, right? So we provide the audio asset, and we make sure that we have everything. So when we send them all the audio assets. They can actually take that and start working on the sound design or change the mix in the layer. They can do whatever they want, but usually we try to establish that as much as possible in the pre-production. So thank you for that. All right, so here, you said that in a 4-hour session, you produce around 600. That would be 200 sound per hour. So in 4 hours, that would be around 800 sound. How much does a session like this cost? It depends from project to project. As you can imagine, indie game developers don't have the same budget to AA or AAA. In AAA, a lot of time we follow union rate. And I say a lot of time, not all the time, but a lot of time, because as you might know or not know, 80% of video game are actually non-union. And there's only 20% who are actually union. So depending on the project and the size of the project, and even sometimes it's not because you're working for a big AAA company that they're going to have the same budget as their other big things. Sometimes they work on smaller projects. So you have to also take that into consideration. It can go from, the smaller project that we worked on, probably $100 an hour. We're talking just the voice. Like, of course, we have to add up the voice director. We have to add up the recording studio and the sound engineer. So there's a few things, but just voice talent, it can go from $100 an hour to $400 an hour. And I'm talking Canadian. Like, I know that there's Canadian dollars, because that in some other places in London, in the state, it's not quite the same thing. Here, union rules in Canada are basically, when you work in AAA, it's $535 an hour. So again, it can actually be quite costly, but I think there are a few advantages that you can get from having a human performers. Yeah, so this is why Sound Library exists, right? When you don't have that specific budget, you can always use that. But yeah, to give you an idea about, because I had to do this recently to know, let's say we need to record 1 character. There's 30 action. Like, all in all, if you include everything, voice talent, recording studio, and everything else, this is basically around 1,500 Canadian dollars per character, everything included, voice director, recording studio. And then that can also vary depending if the voice talent is elsewhere, because we have our recording studio in Montreal, but it happened that sometimes we rent other recording studio. We did that, for example, a couple of times with Home UK for Dead by Daylight. Now, the prices will vary depending on where we are recording, so depending on the casting choices. So that this can have usually an impact on the price. It can rise the price a little bit more. So yeah, and again, it varies from project to project. That would be hard to give you that's the standard, but it's usually, if I have to give one, it's around $1,500 per character and everything included. So thank you for that, Stoyan. Oz. As a metal vocalist for years, was very comfortable with scream, growl. How can one contribute to project like you have? Where to start? Drop me an email. That's the kind of thing. I've been training in voice acting for 20 years. So I would say this because I think I have a video coming out in 2 weeks about that. The capacity to produce sound and sustain them for creature voice acting and other things is absolutely important. But it doesn't mean that you're an amazing singer, that all the skill that you've learned as a singer will be transferable to voice acting. Voice acting in itself is a craft, right? You need to work on that. So the thing is, I've started with mostly metal vocalists when I started the company. Now it's I would say half and half. Like, I have metal vocal or creature voice actor who are comfortable with acting, and I have actor comfortable with vocal effect. Right? For me, I need to actually have both. but I've trained them all, basically, when they have a contract, to make sure that they understand, because again, working in voice acting, it's a craft in itself. And as long as it takes, and you know that being a male vocalist, like it probably took a few years for you to make that what you're doing sustainable. So imagine that amount of years, and then you have to study basically the same amount of years to become a good voice actor. But for crucial voice acting, it's, you know, the capacity to produce those sounds and to sustain them is actually quite important. So find me on social media and hit me up. And like, okay, yeah, Lois, you told me 80 minutes. I think there's 2 more minutes. Let's do one last. It sounds like your word has a lot in common with what a Foley artist does. Yes. I'm following a Foley artist. I don't remember his name on Instagram, but it's so interesting, his whole process about Foley and what they do. We do that mostly when we work on the voice design, right? Not necessarily when it's later down the process, but when we contribute to work on the voice design, then this is, you know, we experiment with sound, we play with a different thing, and hear how it sounds, what we should actually change, as well as the challenge they face in modern time, like library, sound, AI. Yeah. Where do you see similarities and differences right now and in the future? I don't know if the question is specifically for AI related thing. Like, I mean, for me, there's always going to be budget limitation depending on the project, right? Sometimes it's indie game, smaller project. I think sound libraries are great for that because they sometimes don't have the means to hire a creature voice actor or vocal stunt performer. I think, you know, it's been there for a very long time, and it's going to be there, you know, for I think many years. And I started to record sound libraries. So for me, it's to be able to reach people who have budget, so who work on smaller project and have smaller budget. I think it's important. The thing with AI, again, it's happening, and it would be hard for me to just, like, you know, it's like standing in front of a volcano and saying, it's not gonna erupt while it's erupting. It's happening. So for me, the importance of being able to find a model that has what I call the 3C: consent. They're asking for your consent. 2, credit. You are being credited for what you do. And 3, compensation. And for me, those are the 3 rules that should apply to AI model when we talk about voices and other stuff. The problem, we've seen several abuse, several, you know, instances where people took someone else's voice on the internet without their consent, and they did a bunch of stuff. Even a couple of examples that I've seen on LinkedIn recently, something happened to a voice actress like that. So the thing is, with new tech, we always do the dumb stuff first, right? And then after that, we think, oh yeah, maybe we should be careful. And then legislation is usually following years after the tech is on the market. So I think at some point hopefully we will have a balance. But it's like, for me, like, I wasn't born with a cell phone, right? Like, it took actually a long time for me to buy one. So when you think about kids today, right, they all have a cell phone. Like, this is something that is, you know, it's a given for them. This is part of their world. So I do believe that working with AI at some point, for some people, it's going to be part of their world, the same as the cell phone is part of kids' life today. So for me, it's more about finding an ethical and suitable model for voice actors and people working in voices, than just refusing, in a sense, to participate. And I respect that. I have many colleagues who are like, no way, I'm not doing that. And I totally understand that. But I do believe there's going to be a point where a lot of video game company, movie company will want to use that tool for voices. So my approach is basically try to influence the model into a more ethical and sustainable direction for the people in the industry. All right, Louis, I'm just gonna. Oh, there's a lot of question. Can you please do a clicker sound from The Last of Us? There you go. There's a lot of question. I would love to take time to answer you all. If I haven't answered your question, please just reach out to me on social media. I'm on Instagram. I'm on LinkedIn. I'll be more than happy to answer them for you. Thank you all for, before I leave, for being here with me today, but mostly thanks to AirWiggles and AirCon25, Lewis and all. All right. Thank you all, and have an amazing rest of AirCon25. Bye.